Marvel's What If. I said I didn't care about this show, I didn't think I needed to make videos on it, I watched it only out of curiosity, and now here we are. Bad writing, stories that are forced as hell, tons of things that don't make sense. There are some situations and concepts that could be interesting if they were written competently, but that's not what we've gotten. Instead, this show has served up, what if Peggy Carter was Captain America instead of Steve Rogers? What if T'Challa was the bestest Star-Lord ever? What if straight white male characters pissed in everyone's coffee? And what if the zombie apocalypse was an unfunny comedic farce? Meanwhile, the only what if scenario I want to see is what if this show was actually good? Spoiler, it's not. So I was originally going to do this one as a stream a couple weeks ago, had some technical difficulties, then I was going to do it as a video, but my microphone broke so I had to order a new one. Delay. I think I'm glad I had to wait a while though, because since then, a few more episodes have aired, and now I have a clearer picture about what exactly is going on here. Every episode so far has been varying degrees of bad, and in my opinion that's because of 3 different factors. Well, more like 4, but the 4th one kind of goes without saying these days. Rules, consequences, continuity, and the 4th, politics. Duh. First we have rules. There are none. Every episode is supposedly about what would have happened if one thing was different and how other events would have turned out differently because of that. Except it's not. Now that one thing is certainly different each time, but there are also other things that are different, things that shouldn't be different. I'll explain this in a minute, but a lot of the time the changes are completely random and result more from the writer's laziness and incompetence rather than anything story-related. Second, we have consequences. Again, there are none. Because these stories are all one-offs that don't take place in the main MCU continuity, and because we'll most likely never see these versions of the characters again after each episode, the writers are under no obligation to actually write anyone in character or have events play out the way they logically should, so more often than not, they don't. Third, continuity. It's pretty much what the MCU has been built on, and the writers don't have to abide by any. They don't have to worry about how an episode is going to affect future movies or Disney Plus shows down the road, so as far as they're concerned, they can just write a bunch of crazy nonsense that realistically, logically, would never have happened, and it doesn't matter. And finally, politics. If you haven't seen for yourself how the writers' politics have been tainting this show since the first episode, you haven't been paying attention. And I'll give my thoughts on all of them, but I'd like to start with the second episode because that one better encapsulates everything that's wrong with this series. And sadly, this one features T'Challa, voiced by Chadwick Boseman in his final performance. Sadly, because Chadwick tragically passed away after lending his voice to this, and also sadly because the episode sucked. I understand that since Chadwick Boseman is no longer with us, there's a temptation to idealize him and put him and his character up on a pedestal. The problem is, when you do that with T'Challa, he's not really a character anymore. And that might not have been what their intentions were here since Chadwick voiced the character, so the episode was at least written before he died. So maybe it wasn't about honoring the man's life and character, it was just political, at least while they were making it. And they dedicated the episode to him. I'm sure they thought they were honoring him and T'Challa after the fact, but we need to distinguish between honoring and ass-kissing. I'm sure Chadwick Boseman was a hell of a man, a wonderful person. This is not about him. It's about the character of T'Challa and the writing of this episode. Let's make that clear. If you want to make something to honor the character, cool, go ahead. But you do that by remembering the character the way they were. And that's not what happened here at all. And in their efforts to make T'Challa out to be the greatest thing ever to an almost laughable degree, the writers let their politics take over, and the result was a version of T'Challa that didn't even feel like a real person, and an episode that was, frankly, kinda ridiculous. Let's go over some of the things T'Challa does in this episode. He gets abducted by aliens at the age of 8. Isn't frightened, doesn't even seem surprised by it. If anything, he thinks it's cool and exciting. Of course, we can't have him showing fear like any other kid would in that situation, because he's the great T'Challa. Fear is nothing to him. Fast forward 2 decades, and T'Challa has become the version of Star-Lord that Peter Quill wished he was. A perfect hero who can do no wrong, a legendary outlaw whose sheer unstoppable amazingness is revered throughout the universe. Literally, practically everyone he meets is kissing his ass non-stop. He's 2 steps ahead of everybody. He outthinks and outfights all the bad guys like it's easy. His pure innate goodness apparently caused Yondu to reform and go straight, and all the other Ravagers too, like that makes any sense. He inspires everyone he meets to be a better person. He single-handedly convinced Thanos that the whole kill half the galaxy plot was a bad idea with nothing but his words. Off-screen, mind you, and now Thanos is a good guy too, all because of T'Challa. Multiple characters are reduced to shameless, pandering, starry-eyed T'Challa fanboys in his mere presence. Hell, Korath's entire character is different now because of this. His whole personality has been reduced to foaming at the mouth T'Challa fanboy. Does that make sense for Korath? No. Does it make sense for the Ravagers? No. Does it make sense for Thanos? No. Do the writers care? No. You could have had Jesus Christ as Star-Lord, and he wouldn't have been able to accomplish most of this stuff. This isn't a testament to how great T'Challa was. This is just bullshit. And I'm sorry, but the writers really missed the point here. Sure, T'Challa was a great man, a great king, a heroic figure, but the dude wasn't perfect. He had issues like everybody else does. In Civil War, he hated Bucky. He was consumed with a desire for revenge that he had to struggle to overcome, and that was difficult for him. It was something he couldn't reconcile easily. Compare that to what happens here. He finds out that Yondu lied to him about Wakanda being destroyed so he wouldn't want to go back to Earth. He's kind of angry with Yondu for one scene, and then he's completely over it like magic and forgives Yondu just like that, no hard feelings. Because we can't have him holding a grudge or being bitter that he was taken away from his kingdom and his whole life back on Earth because he's the great T'Challa. He's too pure and good and wonderful for such things, right? No. That's not right. T'Challa might have forgiven Yondu eventually, but he would have held a grudge. We know this because we saw him do it before. So in their efforts to idealize and glorify this character, all they really did was write him out of character. And if you need more proof about the political agenda the people behind the show came at this with, check out the final scene of the episode. Look everyone, it's Peter Quill! And if he wasn't Star-Lord, he would have just been mopping the floor at some burger joint like a total loser! Ha 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 ha! Peter Quill sucks! He's nothing compared to the great T'Challa, right everyone? Right? Right? That'll teach Chris Pratt for being a straight white male who has different political views than us. And yet somebody digs up an old piece of fan art of that situation going the other way, which was probably made as a joke, and those same people have a huge problem with it all of a sudden. Funny how that works, isn't it? Look, I know dunking on Peter Quill is the popular thing to do since Infinity War, but come on. Was that necessary? Could they have been any more transparent about this? Seems to me they had 2 agendas with this story. One, to make T'Challa look like the most super amazing, awesome, unbelievably perfect person of all time who makes the universe 1,000,000 times better just by existing, whether that makes any sense or not. And 2, to show how much better of a Star-Lord T'Challa would have been than Peter Quill. And they failed at both, because by doing the first, they turned T'Challa into a rose-colored glasses, super awesome, perfect version of himself instead of the real thing, and by doing the second, they just proved how petty and ignorant they are, because their new and improved, super awesome, perfect Star-Lord is a lot less interesting than the real one. Look at Peter Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy. Was he perfect? Hell no, the dude was a hot mess. But that's why it worked. He managed to save the day in the end, but he was flawed. He was quirky. He made mistakes. He screwed up a lot. He thought he was a lot cooler than he really was when everyone else thought he was kind of a joke. He was afraid to face his mom when she was dying. He resented Yondu for abducting him from Earth and taking him away from his family, which he didn't come to terms with until the end of Volume 2. In short, Peter Quill was an actual character in that movie. T'Challa isn't a character in this episode, he's a fantasy. They were so desperate to put him up on a pedestal that they forgot to make him a person first. They forgot who he actually was, which I would argue is the worst thing they could have done if they were trying to honor him. And that's not even accounting for all the other things that don't make sense about the episode. For example, why is he called Star-Lord? Star-Lord was a name Peter Quill's mom gave him because he was the son of Ego. But T'Challa had nothing to do with that. He's not the son of Ego. He had a different mom. So, why is he called Star-Lord? Doesn't make sense, does it? That's something that logically should not have happened, but the writers did it anyway because there are no rules. You want more examples? I got 'em. Why is Thanos so much weaker all of a sudden? Sure, he doesn't have the Infinity Gauntlet now, but the guy gets taken down by Proxima Midnight in one shot so easily it's like a joke. Then he's captured, locked up, and only escapes because the great T'Challa had a plan the whole time. Then Thanos goes to fight a bunch of guards half his size, and the others are like, "Are you crazy? You'll never take them by yourself." And turns out, they're right. He can't. He has to be saved by Nebula, and she's actually the one who takes down the biggest guard that Thanos couldn't beat. What? This is Thanos we're talking about. The Mad Titan? Why was he nerfed so much here? Probably because they wanted him to be a part of T'Challa's crew, so T'Challa would look that much more awesome, and a Thanos who's as powerful as he's supposed to be would never do that. So Thanos is out of character now too. And I understand that the point of What If is that things are different, but I thought the point was that one specific thing was changed, and then the ripple effect caused by that one change affected other stuff. But that doesn't account for things being different when they shouldn't be different, which has been a problem in every episode so far. And I saw a tweet from somebody after episode 2 premiered expressing how this person thought the episode proved that the MCU would be better without Peter Quill. Because if the great T'Challa was Star-Lord, look how much better everything would be, right? Again, no. The episode proved exactly nothing, and the only thing anyone who believes that has proven is that they missed the point as badly as the writers did. If you think something like this could have ever happened in the official MCU timeline, that the real T'Challa could have done half the stuff he did here in the official MCU timeline, you're nuts. And why? Because the official MCU timeline has to abide by rules and consequences and continuity. That's why the MCU works, and this doesn't. He could never have done all that stuff because then Infinity War and Endgame couldn't have happened, and so on and so on. Because of the storytelling mechanism What If uses, they could do an episode about Peggy Carter being the Red Skull, and it would have been every bit as likely to happen in the MCU as this was. Ironically, that would have made a way more interesting episode than What If T'Challa was Space Jesus. So no, this wasn't a story about what would have happened if T'Challa was Star-Lord. It was just the writers letting their personal fantasies, their biases, and yes, their politics play out on screen. And that's a shame, because T'Challa deserved better. And it sucks that Chadwick's final role had to be something like this, because in their efforts to pay tribute to T'Challa, all they really did was spend 35 minutes kissing his ass. And the only thing that accomplished was making their perfect idealized fantasy version of T'Challa a lot less interesting and frankly a lot more boring than the person he actually was. And the other episodes have been no better. What If Peggy Carter became the super soldier instead of Steve Rogers was painfully bland, had no imagination, and also showed how much less interesting this would have been compared to what really happened. The story of Steve Rogers is simple but compelling. A weak man who became a powerful man to serve his country. But here, the story strips that away, and now it's about Peggy, an already established badass, becoming more badass, and from there they just reenact the basic plot of the first Avenger, but with Peggy in the lead instead of Steve, so instead of fighting Nazis, she can fight sexism and Nazis. And ironically, and I've been laughing about this for weeks now, even though they jumped through all these hoops to elevate Super Soldier Peggy to God tier status, the most interesting thing in the episode by a country mile is still Steve Rogers. Because while Peggy is pretty much just copying what Steve did in a movie from 10 years ago, Steve is actually doing something original. Since he's not the Super Soldier now, he becomes a proto-Iron Man wearing an armored suit built by Howard Stark and powered by an Infinity Stone. Why wasn't the episode about that? That's actually a fun idea and something original. And this is why I've been laughing, because in trying to push Peggy to the forefront, all they did was make her a boring feminist sock puppet who was frankly a lot less interesting than she was before, whereas Steve continued to be the best thing the story had to offer because he remained an actual character. Are you seeing a pattern here? And you know another reason why the Steve plot worked? Because it made sense. Because it was a direct, logical result of the ripple effect caused by the original change. But not everything that's different in the episode is like that. For example, when Peggy saved the Howling Commandos, why wasn't Bucky being experimented on by Hydra like he was in Captain America the First Avenger? Peggy being the super soldier instead of Steve wouldn't have changed that. So why was it different? Logically, it shouldn't have been, but it didn't fit the needs of the story, so the writers changed it even though the change didn't make sense. Now, them changing something relatively minor like that might not seem like a big deal, and it isn't really. It doesn't make sense, but it's harmless. But if the writers can get away with minor stuff that's harmless, they can get away with major stuff that isn't, because it's not main MCU continuity, so they're not beholden to anything, and there are no consequences to changing the canon. And there's tons of examples just like this. See, this is what bugs me so much, and I knew it was going to happen. A show like What If is just going to be a breeding ground for lazy writing. The writers use the storytelling device of the show to just goof off, basically. These episodes aren't official canon. The stories don't need to have ramifications outside of each individual episode, so they can just do whatever they want because there are no rules, no consequences, and no continuity to follow. Episode 3 is a little different. Episode 3 could have been something. What if someone was killing the Avengers before they became the Avengers? This is actually an interesting premise. Yeah, there's some eye-roll-worthy moments where they elevate Natasha's physical prowess to nigh superhuman levels because anything less would be sexism, but there's also mystery, intrigue, a sense of dread, some fun possibilities. For the most part, they had me with this one. Right up until the climax where it all gets ruined. Because the whole crux of the episode is this last-minute twist based on a totally different backstory the writers never bothered to establish and just dropped on us from out of nowhere. All episode long, Avengers are mysteriously dropping dead. No one can figure out how or why, and then in the last 5 minutes, they just spring all this new information on us with no build-up whatsoever. Oh my god. You're the one who's been killing the Avengers. But why? I did it because of a bunch of bullshit we never told the audience about that happened before the events of this episode ever took place. Really? Well, that explanation's pretty weak sauce, and we didn't do a damn thing to earn it, but the episode's almost over, so it. This was the first episode that had a chance to be good, and in one scene, that chance was ripped away by sloppy storytelling. Also, because politics, Coulson is not so subtly gay in this one. It had nothing to do with the reason why this universe went a different way. The ripple effect certainly wouldn't have changed Coulson's sexuality, so why the change? It doesn't make any sense from a logic perspective, and what was even the point of doing it in the first place? For one, MCU continuity Coulson has been dead for a while, so it's not like this is something they could do over there, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. killed him off several additional times after he died in the movies. And two, his endgame love interest while he was still alive was a woman. So even if you wanted to posthumously make the character an alphabet person, what difference would it make? There's literally no reason to do it, and it accomplishes nothing more than creating another inconsistency in the writing that never gets explained. It's so stupid. And it's one more thing that doesn't make sense because it's different when it shouldn't be different. And that becomes even more egregious in episode 4, because that one was this close to being a legitimately great episode. What if Doctor Strange lost Christine instead of the use of his hands? This one had everything you'd want in a what-if concept. It had a good story, it had emotion, it had tragedy, it had an ironic twist that was actually earned this time. This episode had everything going for it, and they still found a way to f*** it up because it's all based on a premise that completely falls apart if you think about it for more than a second or two. Because the whole thing is predicated on the idea that Strange can't save Christine, even though there's really no reason why he can't. He's using temporal magic to go back in time over and over to try all these different things to save Christine, and that's where the episode stops making sense. Because at least two of the things he tries should have worked. In one instance, Strange just doesn't pick her up for the party, so she stays home, but dies when there's an explosion in her building. In another one, they avoid the car crash, they make it to the party, but then Christine has, heart attack or an aneurysm or something. Neither of those things should have happened, because they would have happened in the main continuity, but they didn't. The ripple effect would not have changed either of those things. The one thing that's supposed to change is that Christine dies, and then more changes are supposed to happen as a result of her death. But in the Doctor Strange movie, there was no explosion in Christine's building, there was no aneurysm, so why did those things happen here? They happened because Christine being dead is the only way the story can exist, which is a big problem when Strange has the means to save her. And from there, the episode just spirals completely out of control, because now the writers have to contrive all this bullshit just to explain why Christine keeps dying. Now we've got the Ancient Ones saying that this was some absolute point in time that can't be changed, because Christine's death is what spurs Strange on to start his journey, and if he erases her death, then he'll never defeat Dormammu. That's why Christine has to die. That's why he can't bring her back, because if Christine lives, then Dormammu wins. Except we know that's not true because of the events of the Doctor Strange movie. We know there's a way for Christine to live and for Strange to defeat Dormammu. Literally, all he had to do was go back again, change the course of events to align with the movie, and everything works out. Christine would be alive, Dormammu would be defeated. Why was that not an option? Because they need the rest of the episode to happen. Also, what was going on with the Ancient One in this episode? First she's dead, then she's alive, then she's dead again. Who the hell knows? So even when they are able to come up with a good concept, they still manage to shit the bed, because when the show doesn't have to face consequences for anything that happens or follow any rules, like don't change things that it makes no sense to change, the writers don't feel the need to account for the plot holes or properly explain anything. Why should they? We're never going to see this timeline again. It has no bearing on the MCU, so they can just write whatever, whether it makes sense or not. And by the way, it shouldn't be lost on anyone that in these first 4 episodes, we saw Peggy Carter as a super soldier instead of the male character, T'Challa being a way better Star-Lord than the real Star-Lord, and also a straight white male character murdering the Avengers, and another straight white male character destroying the universe. I'm just saying that stuff should go both ways, and yet for some reason it doesn't seem to. But I will take that stuff in a fucking heartbeat over episode 5. Excuse me 1 second. Oh my god! Episode 5 is fucking terrible! What if Hope Van Dyne's parents brought a zombie plague back from the quantum realm? Because everybody likes zombies, right? They were a really big fad, like 5 or 10 years ago, and I don't know if this was anything like the Marvel Zombies comics I never read, but if it was, then I don't want to read them. Ever. Whose bright idea was it to take a dark AF concept about the entire world coming to an end, being engulfed by a zombie plague in which the Avengers are forced to kill their own teammates lest said teammates eat the flesh off their bones, and load it until it's overflowing with the most cringy, awkward, excruciatingly unfunny jokes I think I've seen in any TV show in years. The writers at Saturday Night Live look like comedic geniuses compared to this shit. If you didn't see it, you have no idea. This episode is so awful. I have no clue how it turned out like this, but it's as if the writers had their hearts set on doing a zombie episode, but that's pretty dark and they'd just done a dark episode the week before, so they figured, let's copy the Joss Whedon style where he does dark stuff, but also has lots of jokes to lighten the mood. And just for shits and giggles, let's steal a gag from Futurama of all things. Those celebrity heads and jars were funny on Futurama, so let's do that. Futurama's been off the air for a while now. No one will remember where the joke came from, right? F*** it. Okay, a few things about that. First, if you're gonna try to write jokes, you should probably, be funny. If you're not funny, don't try to write jokes. And unless your last name is Whedon, you probably shouldn't try to write in the Whedon style, because very few people are able to pull that off. And clearly the ones who can do not include the writing staff of What If. Hence why we have Peter Parker, fresh off the zombification of Tony Stark and the death of Aunt May, making a goofy instructional how-to video about surviving the zombie apocalypse, and Scott Lang's head in a jar having just lost his entire body from the neck down and being used for nothing but comic relief. Look at me! I'm a floating head! Wingardium Leviosa! Everybody laugh! Because the entire world is going to hell, all our friends and families are either f***ing dead or turned into flesh-eating monsters, and that's the perfect time to make a Harry Potter joke, right? Ha 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 ha! The weirdest part is that there are moments when they try to take this whole thing seriously and go for the deep, tragic, emotional cuts and treat big deaths with the gravity that you'd think they should have. Not all of them, mind you. Hope Van Dyne has to kill zombie Sharon Carter, who moments ago was one of their last remaining allies. Hope is bathed from head to toe in Sharon Carter's gore, and the writers choose this moment to make a silly quip. Guys! I'm covered in Sharon! Ha 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 ha! What a f***ing riot, right? Although maybe I shouldn't crap on that moment too much, because at least it was more of a reaction than Bucky had when he was forced to kill Steve moments earlier. Yeah, Bucky literally cuts Captain America in half. He's forced to kill his zombified best friend before said best friend kills him, and Bucky doesn't even blink at this. He has no reaction to it whatsoever. And then they actually have the balls to try tugging on our heartstrings when Hope has to sacrifice herself in the next scene, or when Vision rips the Mind Stone out of his own head because he can't bring himself to kill zombie Wanda? You. Second, the head in a jar gag was funny on Futurama because Futurama was a comedy. I don't know what this was supposed to be, but a comedy sure as hell wasn't it. Scott Lang's a floating head in a jar. He's making joke, 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 joke. Then, oh no, Hope. The woman I love has been turned into a horrible, mindless, flesh-eating monster. Then, 5 seconds later, he's right back to making jokes. Because if a floating head in a jar can't punch you in the face with jokes non-stop, then what's the point of having a floating head in a jar? And then the story ends with the cherry on the cake. Zombie Thanos wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, meaning that even though the last couple survivors might have a way to turn the zombies back to normal, the entire universe is going to be up shit creek before they have a chance to use it. So their desperate efforts to survive long enough to find that cure, which we've been following for the last half hour, have just been rendered completely f***ing pointless. If Scott Lang still had his body, I would shove this entire episode so far up his asshole, he could floss his teeth with it. And you know what the real bitch of it is? This episode was probably the most well put together episode so far. It did still have the last minute twist which cheapened everything that just happened like episode 3 had, and most of the characters were written like absolute garbage, but at least they reined in the politics a little bit to the point where they had a portrayal of T'Challa that actually felt like the character. At least I didn't notice any massive plot holes that should have stopped the entire episode from even happening. At least there was a more or less logical chain of events from A to B to C. Ironically, this was the first episode that actually followed the rules I thought What If was supposed to follow, where one thing is different and every other change comes as a result of that. This was the first episode to get that right, and it was still f***ing awful because whatever paint-sniffing clowns crapped this script out thought the best way to do a dark, frightening story about all the Marvel characters being decimated by a relentless horde of flesh-eating freaks was to cross Zombieland with Futurama and then write it all in the Joss Whedon style while lacking the understanding of how that style ever worked in the first place, the comedic chops to write jokes that are actually funny, and the talent to make the story work in any way, shape, or form despite all those other things working against them, resulting in an agonizingly awkward shit show of an episode that simultaneously tries to be a horror story, a tragedy, and a comedy, and fails at all three so f***ing badly, I was begging for another hurricane to come along and knock out my power again so I wouldn't have to watch anymore. This episode. So, turns out I lied earlier. There aren't 4 reasons why this show is bad, there are 5. And at the end of the day, that 5th reason is the only one that really matters, isn't it? So yeah, Marvel's What If is not a good show. They removed the rules, consequences, and continuity which had helped make the MCU incredibly successful for years, added a big fat dose of the politics that had been creeping into the MCU more recently, which vocal chunks of the fanbase have been rejecting, and to top it all off, it's not even written well. This show is an utter creative failure. It's exactly what I said it was months ago when the trailer came out. It's half-baked AU fanfic made for idiots on Tumblr. And it's not even good fanfic either. If you like it, congratulations. But to me, this show seems like an incredible waste of time and energy that could have been put into a project that was better written, a lot cooler, and a lot more interesting. So in summation, I don't like What If. These first 5 episodes have been full of problems. Even the voice acting, featuring a lot of the actors from the movies, has been weirdly hit and miss. The animation and music are usually very good, but a show can be well produced and still be badly written. And kudos to the production team at least, that stuff is great. It's easily the most well-produced animated project Marvel's done. Compare this to their other cartoons, it's not even a contest. But the writing sucks, so the end result is just a highly polished turd. Whew! Oh my god. I've been waiting weeks to unload all that stuff. Thank you for listening to me vent for however long this video has lasted. It feels like a long one, but I had a lot to unpack. If you enjoyed my bitching into the ether, please leave a comment down below. The algorithm's been kicking my ass this year, so every comment helps. Also, ding the bell icon and follow my social media to always be notified when I upload new stuff, and check out the live streaming channel. The links are down there. Thumbs up the video, share, subscribe, make sure you're still subscribed. That one's important, and I'll be back with more real soon. So stay tuned for that, do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.